of Team STPI, I welcome you all to this webinar titled Tobacco Taxation and Nostrum to the Ailing Economy. Today's session is going to be a discussion whereby we're going to be answering the following questions. How can tobacco taxation support the hard-pressed economy? What existing gaps can be bridged to increase the federal excise duty to reach the widely accepted benchmark of an excise tax share of about 70% of the retail price? And how can Pakistan move towards a uniform federal excise duty rate for all cigarette brands? Moving forward, before I introduce my esteemed panelists, I'd like to make a couple of housekeeping announcements. May I please request our speakers to keep their microphones off when they're not speaking to ensure good quality audio for everyone. Speakers are also encouraged to switch on their cameras, especially when they're speaking, if their network allows them to do so. If all panelists are comfortable, this meeting is being recorded and we're also going live on our social media platforms. You are all welcome to revisit the discussion later and feel free to share it with your network as well. We also invite questions and comments from our audience in the chat box on the right side of the window. Please feel free to speak in Urdu or English, whatever language you're comfortable with. And I, as moderator, will prompt you once we are pressed on time. Moving forward, we have a very august panel who has joined us here today. Please allow me to introduce all of them to you. We have Asif Iqbal Saab, who is Managing Director at SPDC. We have Abdul Wahid Ukeli Saab, who is the Director General Withholding Taxes at the Federal Board of Revenue. We also have Rizwan Sarfraz Saab, who is Joint Director at FBR. We have Amar Rashid Sahab, who is Lead Researcher at Heartfile. We have Khurram Hashmi Sahab, who is the Technical Lead at the Union. We have Dr. Shafqat Munir, who is the Research Fellow at Sustainable Development Policy Institute. We have Dr. Waqar Ahmed, who is Joint Executive Director at STPI. And we have Mr. Wasif Naqvi as well, who is Senior Research Associate at STPI. I thank you all for taking time out for this session and for being present. And of course, we all look forward to all your interventions regarding this topic as well. Moving forward, I'd like to move to the opening remarks of this session. For that, I'd like to request Dr. Shafqat Munir. Sir, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants who spared their time to participate in this very important discussion on tobacco taxation. I would like to start from one of my memories. Whenever I used to go to Europe or particularly UK, the friends always asked me to bring packets of cigarettes from Pakistan. Then I digged out why these guys are always asking me to bring cigarettes instead of any other thing like the traditional things from Pakistan. So the issue was that the cigarettes were at a high cost in these countries because of the taxation ratio. But here, as we have seen, that ratio in Pakistan is not at that level, which should benchmark to the 70% of the retail price of the cigarette. At the moment, it is around something 40 or something like this. So that area is important to look into this discussion today. The first question, particularly, how can tobacco taxation support the hard press economy? There are many things on tobacco is concerned, particularly on taxation. So instead of just moving very slowly, let us revisit the policy of slow into fast track kind of taxation or progressive taxation in a fast track, not in a slow track. Then maybe we can reach at the level where we actually want to go. This can help us in two ways. One is supporting the hard press economy, as the question is. Secondly, it can help the health issues, because directly tobacco related health issues are causing a lot of diseases in people, particularly in the poverty stricken areas where people use different grade cigarette. Even high grade cigarettes are also not healthy. So the death toll which is around 170,000 in Pakistan. And Pakistan is, by the way, 10th among the countries which are tobacco consumer countries, and that's a disaster. And we also are among the 10 countries which are hit by the climate disaster. So this is also a disaster, whether it's a tobacco related thing, because tobacco also has a link with climate as well. If we club all these things in a sequence, then certainly we have to have only one option left, which is revisiting the existing taxation regime. Otherwise, we have published pictorial warnings on cigarettes, but people are holding these pictorial warning packets in their hands and they are smoking. They are smoking publicly. I would like to quote another example. When I was working with the news in the newsroom, in the English newspaper in Islamabad, so once I had some lungs problem. So when I get tested, doctor asked me that please quit your cigarettes. I said, I don't smoke. I never smoke. So they say, oh, then you will be having passive smoking. So this smoking paradigm or regime is a consequential, has the different impacts in a way that it impacts your life, it impacts your health and your economy, whether it's your personal economy or the national economy. So my one-liner message here is that we have to revisit the taxation regime to reach the benchmark of 70%. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shafkat, for your opening remarks. And indeed, tobacco taxation will not only act as a deterrent to the excessive use of cigarettes in our country, but also be a good help to the economy alike. Thank you, sir. Moving on, before we kickstart the discussion, we're going to have an agenda setting presentation that is going to be presented to all of you by Mr. Wasif Naqvi. So, Wasif, over to you.
Thank you very much, Manur. I'll share a few notes before starting the formal presentation. The time now is for heavy taxes to be charged on consumer items, especially proven as harmful as tobacco products. And such measures are expected to give fruitful results for the public health as well as to support the dwindling economy situation. And smoking in Pakistan is on the rise. On the other hand, we are short of revenues. International Monetary Fund supports such taxes, and Pakistan is far below the international recommended level of 70% of the retail price. Tobacco use is deadly, as 8 million deaths that occur globally are linked to use of tobacco, of which nearly around 170,000 are from Pakistan alone. And just to put in perspective, COVID-19 related deaths in Pakistan were around 31,000. So besides the cardiovascular diseases, use of tobacco cause more than 20 different types of cancers, and 90% of the lungs diseases in males are attributed to use of tobacco. And tobacco use is on the decline globally, whereas in Pakistan, it is other way around. 10.7% of youth aging between 13 to 15 years are smoking, and 24% is the overall prevalence rate. With a high growth rate of 62.7% of people under 25 years of age, Pakistan's youth is a lucrative market for the tobacco industry. Pakistan is signatory to FCTC, which is a Framework Convention on Tobacco Control since 2004, which covers almost all factors of tobacco use, including strengthening of the tobacco taxation. FCTC's Article 6 of the taxation on tobacco products demands its reduction. And a study shows that if tax increases the price of tobacco product by 10%, it could decrease the consumption about 4 to 5%. WHO recommends at least a 70% share of excise tax on all on the retail price of the tobacco products, whereas currently the average federal excise duty on cigarette pack is around 44.3%. And this number came after a step taken by the incumbent government through Tax Law Ordinance 2022 on August 23rd last year to generate additional revenue, and before that and average excise share was around 40.4%. The estimated increase in tax share was higher in low price brands for around 4.4% as compared to the high price brands for around 1% increase. Following the change, the FED rate, which is federal excise duty rate, per 20 cigarettes pack was increased from 33 rupees to 41 rupees on low tier and from 104 rupees to 130 rupees on the high tier cigarettes. The average rate on FED on cigarettes was increased by 12.5%, which further enhanced with overall increase of around 24.5%. Tobacco consumption has a health burden of 615 billion rupees, and it contributes only 115 billion in revenue from tobacco taxation. Ministry of Finance has asked for tax proposals to escalate the revenue from 225 billion rupees to 300 billion rupees to be levied through Tax Law Amendment 2023, which may help for 9th review of the IMF. The proposals for mini budget suggest that for raising tax on tier 1 and tier 2 cigarettes by at least 2 rupees per stick to help raise around 120 billion rupees. Increasing budget deficit has reached at unsustainable levels with last 5 months of the fiscal year likely to worsen more. And tobacco health levy bill is ready to be tabled in the parliament. Now I would share a few slides with you to start the formal presentation, which takes another 2 to 3 minutes probably. Do I need to share the screen from here? Thank you. So I assume that the presentation is now visible.
Yes, it's visible.
Thank you. The topic of today's discussion is tobacco taxation, a nostrum to the ailing economy. We'll discuss the cost of tobacco use, indirect taxation by the tax authorities, complicity by tobacco industry, narratives of tobacco industry, higher cost of cigarettes, deter smoking, need for higher taxes on tobacco, tax policy needs to become complemented by other factors, challenges, and then recommendations. So basically the need for today's discussion was that in the run-up to budget of fiscal year 2024, STPI has been invited by the finance minister for concrete taxation recommendations. In the background, the financial viability, just to share the background of this, the financial viability is mainly dependent on revenue generation. And revenue could be collected through many sources like tax on income, assets, consumption, remittances, etc. However, significantly important is the collection of direct taxes being their nature of ability to pay principle. Government's inability to introduce a just tax system that may cater for Pakistan's needs often goes to a vicious debt trap where revenue and expenditures are bridged through borrowing, leading to compromise the ability of state for spending on welfare, including health, education, and infrastructure. So the cost of tobacco use. The number of smokers has surpassed 31 million, leading to 466 deaths a day due to tobacco-induced diseases, including lungs disease, heart disease, and different types of cancers and diabetes, etc. Every day, 1,200 children from age 6 to 15 start smoking. On the economic side, the economic cost of smoking in Pakistan is more than 615.07 billion, equal to 1.6% of GDP, and the revenue collected from tobacco industry is 20% of the total cost. Tobacco taxation is one of the highly neglected empower strategy in case of Pakistan, and one of the major obstacles is the absence of tobacco taxation policy. Now, indirect taxations, taxation measures by the taxation authorities. FPR and provincial tax bodies have collected indirect taxes by collecting tax on goods and services instead to increasing tax on incomes and assets, taking away a large portion from the poor's income. During the fiscal year 2022, the best revenue spinner for FPR was sales tax, comprising 41% of the total tax collection. If imports and contracts, etc., may be added, the figure could go up to 70%. Slow growth and ever-increasing size of informal economy has given a nosedive to our tax to GDP ratio. Disregarding in broadening the tax base, FBR is mainly relying on revisioning of the tax rates and further collection from existing taxpayers. The withholding taxes also have regressive impacts. The major factor seems to be a strong nexus between legislators and powerful elite of the society. Several amenities and immunities could be taken as a pointer. Weaknesses in implementing track and trace system instead of penalizing evaders and incentivizing them led to weaken the trust of those who pay the tax. Tax incentives are extended to those who hardly have a potential to export-led growth like real estate sector. An orthodox approach of taxation bodies or policymakers has hindered the tie the benefits of real tax potential like tobacco industry. Complicity by tobacco industry. Tobacco entities in Pakistan are using the undeclared warehouses. I would not name the companies. Black market cigarettes have often been caught there. Stock of cigarettes in black market warehouse counted nearly 60 million illegal smokes. Illicit cigarette factories nestle among the mountains near the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Obnoxious underreporting in Pakistan by the tobacco industry cost the country $143 million to $448 million in lost taxes each year between year 2015 and year 2018. Now, I would share a few narratives of the tobacco industry that only 2 tobacco companies pay 98% of the total tax as tobacco collection. Remaining 40% companies pay a meager 2% of the total tobacco tax. These 2 companies have 98% share of the market. During the past few years, the volume of illicit trade in Pakistan has increased rapidly from 23% in 2018 to 34% in 2019 and 40% by 2020. Rupees 209 billion in tobacco taxes in the last 5 years due to inconsistent taxation policies and poor revenue collection mechanism for the tobacco industry. Evidence claims 9% to 17% illicit market in Pakistan, whereas tobacco companies claim more than 40%. Asking the public to sign a pledge and petition to the policymakers to save rupees 44 billion supposedly lost to illicit tobacco trade every year. And there are a few hashtags used by them. Higher cost of cigarettes, deter smoking, and this is, is very evident from. WHO suggests, as I already discussed in the earlier slides, that 70% of the tax on cigarettes, whereas Pakistan, besides increasing the tax last year, still standing far off the target. Sri Lanka is one where revenue is being generated either by eliminating or by minimizing the untaxed segment. Policymakers and legislators in Pakistan need to address the illicit markets that eat away government's revenues. In the second quarter of fiscal year 2023, the federal government imposed 36 billion tax on cigarettes and 2 billion on tobacco processing. The price of tier 1 brand was increased up to 30%, as I already shared in the notes, and the price of tier 2 cigarettes gone up to 20 rupees. Low taxed cigarettes comprise the majority of the market share, where the average excise is 44.3%, which is much lower than generally accepted benchmark of 70%. Now, these 5 points, why we need for higher tobacco taxes. The higher taxes would increase unaffordability, induce quitting, prevents from new initiation, reduce health burden, increase revenue, and that would also ensure the good public health. Tax policy needs to be complemented by other measures, because tax policy alone cannot work. That cannot work in the silos. That has to be backed by the trade policy, which ensure export and import orders can help limit inputs to tobacco sector. That has to be backed by the health policy, where inadequate text and pictorial health warning, underage sale prohibition warning, retail price and manufacturer's name, date of manufacturing and expiry, or graphic health warning on every cigarette is a compulsion. Then provincial policies, where provincial health departments and provincial revenue authorities need to be taken on board for this discussion. A few challenges which are being faced by the tobacco control advocates. The tobacco industry has a very high pressure on the legislators. They blame the illegal and illicit or the smuggled cigarettes, the smuggling market, revenue pilferage, technical expertise, including the individuals and institutional capacity as well, complexity of the taxation system, and geo-economy, which is, Naswar, etc., which is untaxed. Then comes the last slide, which is regarding the recommendations. A working group on FBR should be constituted, having representation from Ministry of National Health Services and Regulation and Coordination and provincial governments. Tax measures may be proposed for forthcoming budget by end March. A study is proposed to estimate the illicit share of tobacco market, including Naswar. Small tobacco manufacturers should be brought under the same tax regime. Any gaps left would make the entire exercise futile and hard to implement. FBR should convene a public session on track and trace efficacy. Minimum stipulated floor tax may be considered for fiscal year 24 budget. Focus on final retail price, that should be minimum 70% of the retail price should be taxed as recommended by the FCTC. Tobacco tax share of health burden. Local evaders and smugglers should be punished. Policy vacuum novel nicotine and tobacco products. Geo-economy should be focused, and persistently monitoring and exposing the tobacco industry. And I'm sorry for lingering it on, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vasif, for that extremely insightful presentation. I'd like to open the floor for our panel discussion as well now. So first, Asif Iqbal Saab, perhaps if I can request you to add your interventions to the discussion, sir.
Thank you, Vasif. आपने बड़ा अच्छा overview दिया. I have just 3-4 things to say on that. First of all, I think when we talk about tobacco taxation, it's not only just for generating revenues from the government. So we all know that it has dual objective. One is the revenue generation, and the other one is the public health objective. So there is a limit that we can generate the revenue, and we know that there is a potential, but we also keep in mind that the other ultimate objective is that the consumption has to be reduced, so that as you said, rightly pointed out, the public health cost, which is like 5 times more the revenue, so that can be taken care of. So currently what we see, if we see the tobacco tax share in terms of overall revenue, so overall revenue, the tax revenue, it's around 3% gross revenue. But if we are talking about federal revenue issue, if you eliminate the tax share of provincial governments that is under the NFC, so that means that altogether FED and GST, they are around 6% of the total revenue. federal revenues from the taxation. So of course, as I said, so higher taxation is not only for revenue, but it should also, it has the dual objective of the public health as well. So it can give a good signal in the society as well that government is taking care of the public health as well. So one point is that. Now, when we talk about what the others, the three questions that were posed here, that what are the existing gaps that can be bridged to increase the FED to reach the 70%. So one thing again, you rightly said, but it has to be reiterated that this is the minimum level that needs to be achieved. So 70% is not an ultimate target, but is the minimum. So currently we have, like, after this increase in August, last increase, because there was an increase in taxes, and also there was an increase before the tax, there was an increase in the prices as well. So currently our estimate is around 41% tax share. So 41% is average tax share, which has reduced from the last 2 years. It was in 2021, it was 47% almost. Then it went down to 45%, and currently it's 40% according to our estimates. Of course, these estimates can change because we actually don't know the exact share of the market. These are estimates. I mean, that when we talk about taxable sales, so of course we know that 98% are the two companies, but when we take into account the other things as well, because we actually don't know what is the share of tier 1 and the tier 2. So our estimate is about something between 80 to 85, the lower tier, the economy brands, and between 15 to 20% of the upper tier. But of course, the FBR, I mean, the representative is here. He can provide some more guidance about, because they know actually what are the taxable sales data, and they can tell us that what is actually the share of economy brands and the premium brand. So as I said, the share has declined. Currently it's 41%. And if we think we want to take it to the 70% of the tax share, provided that the producer prices are not increased, because it's very tricky. This tax share thing is tricky, because when you increase the tax, and if there is an increase in the producer price as well, then the share remains, it doesn't increase as well. That has happened this year as well, because during the last 1 year, there has been an increase of more than 35% in the cigarette prices. So that's why it's very tricky when we talk about 70% or so. So that it has to be kept in mind. And of course, the illicit trade argument, I would say that it's a bit exaggerated when we talk about 40% or so. ISPDC has done a study last year, which was on the underreporting by these three companies, which is Philip Morris, Pakistan Tobacco, and Khyber Tobacco, because these three are listed companies and their accounts are available. So our estimate is that the average underreporting by these three companies is around 8%. So if we include other companies like smuggling and all other things, so again it doesn't go beyond 20% according to our estimate. And now we think it has been on a decline because of the track and trace system that has been initiated and implemented by the FBR. Now it took a few months, like in July, August we didn't see, but in September we saw in the market that the packs that are available, they have the tax stamps. Even the most notorious brand that we see in the, I'm taking the names of brand because they I mean, there is a need to name and shame as well. So the Kisan, which is produced by Khyber Tobacco Company, last year we did a survey. The average price, market price, was 35 rupees per pack. So if you are paying 32 rupees or 33 rupees as a FED and plus the GST, how can you sell a pack of 20 cigarettes in 35 rupees? But now what our observation is that even this Kisan brand, which is the third largest company among the listed companies. So we have seen that now they are also producing the cigarettes with the tax stamp. So we are hopeful that this track and trace system will be very helpful in reducing percentage of the incidence of illicit trade. And next, last point I would like to make about when you say that how we move towards the FED, uniform FED rate, of course. One, I think the suggestion that has been put forward by SPDC earlier as well, that we need to have a medium-term tax policy. For example, when we talk about medium-term, so there has to be you say 3 years policy, that okay, next year will increase by this much, next year by this much. So that it can reduce the speculation kind of thing. So you all know that how tobacco industry speculates and how they manipulate. Just to give you one example, average declared production that we get from the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, on average last year it was 5 billion sticks per month, 59 billion in a year. So how do they play? They had an idea that there would be an increase in tax rate because there was for the last 3 years there was no increase in FED. So in July the reported production is just 1 billion, so down by 4 billion sticks, which is, I mean, which is not understandable. So that's very clear. It's a very clear sign that how they are trying to manipulate, that they overproduced in earlier month because they expect that tax will increase and they play with it. But as I said earlier, I can see some evidence in the market that the TNT system is playing its role. So one thing is that we need to have to avoid these speculations. It's better to have a medium-term tax policy that we know already that next year it will be like this and next year the other tax, 3 or 5, whatever you can say. And the minimum increase should be that it has to be adjusted by inflation and the income increase, that a term that we call affordability. For example, currently our estimate is that 3.4% of per capita GDP is required to purchase 2,000 cigarettes in Pakistan. So when we say that affordability has to be kept constant, it's not a desirable thing, because you just raise the tax rate as the inflation raises, that means there is no affordability remains constant. So the objective is that the cigarettes needs to be make less and less affordable. So what we are thinking, we have SPDC is working, you all know, on tobacco taxation with the help of University of Illinois and the Bloomberg partners. So what we think that there has to be some adjustment over and above the inflation. So the target should be like, if inflation is, for example, 30%, then the FED rate should be increased by 40%. Things like that. So our estimate is that if we increase next year if we increase the FED by 43% or so additional revenue generation would be around 38 to 40 billion rupees. And taking to the 70%, we can get something about 65 billion. But I think we can get more than that because because of the track and trace system. So at least the illicit trade that is there, the proportion will be declined. And one last thing was, if you talk about the conducting a study, the recommendation. So just to let you know that SPDC plans to do a study that will measure the illicit trade in Pakistan. So one study we have already conducted. It gives us some, it will be out in a couple of weeks or so. And then we also plan to repeat this study this year because of the price change. So we want to understand that how price changes would impact the proportion of illicit trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Asif Saab. Your interventions were quite insightful and very pertinent recommendations that you've made, sir. Moving on, I'd like to invite Mr. Abdul Wahid Okeli to speak. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, SPDI, for arranging this workshop. And I'm really grateful to Mr. Asif, who had a word of praise for the FBR's track and trace system. But I just want to put on record that our implementation of track and trace system is actually not yet complete, because although we have implemented it in about 9 companies, 3 of them are the big players, PTC, PMI, and Khyber Tobacco, and 6 are relatively smaller. But there are at least 8 companies that are still in litigation, and we are still expecting that now that the judgment has been reserved for orders by the Chief Justice of the Islamabad High Court, and hopefully as soon as the order is released, we'll move to complete the rest of the sector. Again, as I have heard a lot of things, obviously the FED on tobacco was increased in the last financial year through the last Finance Act. And I do understand that increasing taxes, what we call sin tax, is one of the major way of curtailing tobacco production, but raising taxation has its own flip sides to it as well. But then whatever decision is taken by the Parliament, the Federal Board of Revenue will implement it. The only one thing which I think is currently missing from our track and trace system is that it did not incorporate a lot of reaching out to public kind of a thing. For example, I think that many in the public do not know that the tax stamp which is there on the cigarette can be verified through an application which is FBR Transact app. So if any smoker downloads that app on his smartphone, he can himself verify whether that the cigarette that he's having is counterfeit or not. So why I'm saying that a lot of reaching out to public on this is required, because we know that it is still very common and very easy to find the imported tobacco, high-priced tobacco cigarette brands at the time of retailers. Although alongside the track and trace, the Federal Board of Revenue also established Inland Revenue Enforcement Network, which is currently headed by the Chief Commissioner Peshawar, Ms. Akil Ahmed Siddiqui, and because we all know that most of the cigarette manufacturing is taking place in the KPK province or Azad Jammu and Kashmir, so that is why his role is very phenomenal in trying to contain the flow of movement of cigarettes without tax stamps. But again, we all have to bear in mind that because certain companies were in litigation, so we could never publicize in the print and electronic media that any cigarette box without the tax stamp would be illegal. So once this litigation is over, I think we at the Federal Board of Revenue will be able to expand our outreach to the general public to create awareness and to telling them to discourage imported tobacco. So because once that thing happens, then there will be a bigger impact in terms of revenue, and as well as there will be a bigger impact on the brands that are not licensed by the Federal Board of Revenue. So I think at the moment, this is all that I have to say. And one more thing which I would like to mention, that with the Federal Board of Revenue's track and trace system, we discovered that one of the local manufacturers in Karachi, who was actually manufacturing tax stampers, the equipment to stamp the tax stamps onto the cigarette packets, was actually importing his product, but did not have a lot of buyers within Pakistan. So with the introduction of track and trace system on tobacco, sugar, fertilizer, and cement sector, that manufacturer has got a chance of import substitution, and we may have to, reduce our import bill as well. So thank you very much, SDPI. I'm always available if there is any further feedback or any assistance is required from the Federal Board of Revenue. We will be available to assist your efforts, and we really appreciate this effort, because such efforts actually create greater awareness and can reach out to people where we are not able to reach. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kelly Saab. Look forward to the awareness campaign that you just mentioned, and also how you intend to strengthen the track and trace system. And of course, through that, the taxation regime is also going to be strengthened with regards to tobacco. So look forward to that, sir. Moving on, I'd like to invite Mr. Amar Rashid for his interventions. So over to you. Sir, you're on mute.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I'd like to thank SDPI for the invitation and for the excellent presentation. I believe the panelists afterwards have largely covered most of the issues that are relevant to this discussion. I mean, clearly, tobacco taxation is one of the critical challenges facing. It's one of the critical public health challenges as well as revenue challenges facing Pakistan. And we are one of the countries where cigarette prices in the WHO EMRO region, Pakistan is amongst the countries where cigarettes are the most affordable in terms of the composite of their prices and their taxation. So we already covered the various issues surrounding the FED. Just like to talk just briefly about some information issues that the data and information issues that are, I think, preventing more effective implementation of FED taxes in Pakistan. And one of the questions is of underreporting of both production and financial data by the tobacco companies. A recent study by PIPE found that firms are underreporting their cigarette production data by between 27 to 47% annually. And the financial data, including revenues and profits, by 20 to 40%. And so they did a time series model and compared that with which used projections compared with what companies were actually reporting, and found that the projections are vastly higher than companies that actually reported data. And a lot of this cannot really be ascertained effectively because of information issues. We have serious shortfalls in terms of reliable and frequent data on the prevalence and consumption of tobacco, and specifically whether it's on cigarettes or including on other tobacco products like smokeless tobacco, to really understand how users are responding to various taxation and pricing choices. It's also very notoriously difficult to find publicly available data on FED revenues for researchers in order to understand how prices are affecting revenues and how that could be improved. Similarly, most of the current data available on consumption of tobacco in Pakistan does not really distinguish between legal and illegal consumption. And the surveys of the illegal trade market are very few and frequent also. So it's very hard to counter tobacco industry claims without robust data on consumption in Pakistan, which would give us a better sense of whether taxation policies working as much as they should be. And from there, there's just some, I think some administrative issues were also touched on. The track and trace system and its implementation, as Mr. Abdul Wahid Saab just spoke about. Then there's also the question of penalization. Even if infractions are caught, the penalties imposed on tobacco companies are rarely enough to cover up for the massive profits and revenues they're making in tobacco sales in Pakistan. So there does need to be a revision of the costs that are imposed in cases of infraction, and those need to be increased significantly. And then we need more careful scrutinization of the financial data of tobacco companies to be able to tackle underreporting of both their production and financial data. And just briefly, finally, I think we often discuss these things as administrative and policy issues, when in fact it's very clear that these are also political issues. The fact that the tobacco industry in Pakistan and especially where the production of tobacco, the agricultural production of tobacco takes place, people are usually, those producers are usually very well connected to those in government. They're represented in every government, and it's very hard to increase tobacco taxes without considerable pushback from within, often the National Assembly and coalition partners in the government. And in order to, and obviously then there's also evidence of very strong relationship between tobacco companies and FPR, which is much more so than in places where FCTC has been fully implemented, and there are legal bars in place for those sorts of interactions between tobacco officials and tobacco companies and government officials. And in opposition to that, we do not have, like in many other countries, a very strong opposing civil society coalition for tobacco taxation, which needs to, in many countries where there have been successful tobacco tax increases for up to or greater than 70% of retail prices, those have been the result of consistent work by a very strong tobacco coalition, which campaigns specifically around the time of the budget to ensure to run that awareness campaign, as Mr. Wahid spoke about also. We need those organized efforts to be able to counter the influence of the tobacco industry. And we need civil society and public health authorities, medical associations to come together to be able to play this part, and especially use electronic media and social media as well, to be able to do this specifically before budgets take place every year in the weeks and months leading up to that, so that we can counter the influence and that the tobacco lobby companies have over policy making, both at an administrative level and at a legislative level in Pakistan. So just some few points from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amar Saab. Absolutely, there's a lack of evidence, and also the elite capture factor really poses a problem to the researchers and policymakers alike. So moving forward, I've just been informed that Mr. Minhajus Siraj has also joined us in this panel discussion. He is a professor of Health Services Academy and former joint executive director at PIMS. Sir, I would like to request you for your interventions now. Sir.
Thank you very much, STPI, for having me here, upgrading me as a panelist. I just intended to watch and listen to my worthy senior colleagues, especially from the FBR. And I must appreciate that besides a common understanding, FBR has always been proactive in tobacco taxation matters. And I recall a call when I was...
Sir, sorry to disturb you, but your voice is not that audible. So if you could move the mic closer.
Sorry. So I was just trying to tell that FBR has always been proactive in tobacco taxation matters. And I recall that the chairman FBR was kind enough to contact me when I was looking after this smoke-free cities project in Capital Administration and Development Division. And he was asking about the government's, the take on policy decision on tobacco taxation. And the things were a little bit delayed then. As far as the tobacco taxation measures, first of all, I would like to make a request to my FPR colleagues that they should be conducting a training session for the health advocates, especially who are in the Ministry of National Health with the tobacco control, that how to make a proper proposal for tax raise. That is the kind of activity which needs to be streamlined before any other thing can happen. Because when our colleagues have been talking about this tobacco taxes or raise tobacco taxes and just impose taxes and that even it was discussed in the budget session at that time, even 2019, and then it could not materialize because the financial discipline of the federal government was not in line with those proposals. So the basic thing is that when we are trying to make our case a strong case, yes, the FBR has to approve that to bring it into the budget, then yes, the proposal from the Ministry of Health should be on a strong footing and on proper I think the rules of business should be observed on that. And then coming to the of course, when we talk about tobacco taxes, and as Mr. Wasif has pointed out in his last slide, that there should be the small tobacco manufacturers should be brought into the net. Here I must just remind all my worthy colleagues and the tobacco control advocates that there is a very thin line between what the tobacco industry wants and what the government has to do. You see, when these major role players, they are capturing 90% plus of the market, and then the illicit trade, as Mr. Wasif has pointed out, that it has risen to almost 40% now, which I don't agree to that extent, but still maybe. If it is backed by scientific evidence, then yes, the major role players wants this 40% to be eliminated. And of course, the main tobacco industry role players who are registered with the FBR, they want these industries to be highlighted and most of them to be removed from the system or removed from the market, so that these major role players capture 100% of the market share. So just when we were drafting this illicit tobacco trade protocols in Geneva, WHO FCTC, these things had long discussions about so many things that what we try to take as a measure, the tobacco industry thinks otherwise, and they only focus on their own market share and you see their profits. So, just only one thing which I would like to request, that whatever we do, we should be doing that on strict financial discipline lines in the with the consultation and rather with the guidance of the our friends in FBR. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, and thank you for joining us on such short notice as well. Really grateful to you, sir. Moving on, I'd like to request Dr. Waqar Ahmed for his interventions, and also, sir, if you can sort of wrap up the discussion as well, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Mahnoor. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Sorry, I have a bandwidth issue, so I'm unable to switch my screen and speak at the same time. So I won't be putting on my screen just so that people can hear me properly. So let me start by thanking Wasif for his presentation and esteemed colleagues for their interventions. I think that Mr. Abdul Wahid Okali Saab has summed it up very well. There is an intent of the government to really move in a very balanced direction, where, of course, It takes into account its revenue mobilization needs, but also contribute to the health protection needs of the society, something which Dr. Minhaj Saab, Mr. Asif Iqbal Saab also pointed towards. So let me just, given that you have also given me the responsibility of rounding up the discussion, so there are some recommendations from STPI's research, which I hope will be taken up by the authorities in the forthcoming budget as well. We do understand that IMF has supported such taxes and tobacco excises in Pakistan, and IMF has also suggested that currently these are below the recommended global level. So I think that should provide us some encouragement to look innovatively towards taxing this sector more. We also note that FBR has been very proactive when it comes to brand registration. 8 local tobacco companies and 2 multinational cigarette manufacturing companies have applied to FBR for registration of their brands to obtain the brand registration certificates. We are recommending, as part of our budget proposal, that the brand registration fee structure should be increased, 1, and 2nd, there should be an annual renewal of this brand registration along with an annual fee as well. We also note that all tax collected from the tobacco sector should be in advanced form. It should be advanced tax. This should pose some, of course, urgency on part of the tobacco manufacturers so that the taxation acts in a manner which also discourages consumption as well. There will be a tendency to pass on the advanced incidents, which hopefully should lead to some decline in the consumption. Taxing inputs of cigarette, there is some room over there as well. And we believe that tax experts have also suggested that the newly imposed FED on tobacco purchase may not impact the farmers as such. But if I was hearing Dr. Minhaj and Asif Saab correctly, we also feel that the burden of taxing a tobacco sector should also fall on the farmers if one has to discourage the consumption of the final commodity. Currently, of course, no FED is imposed on raw tobacco leaf, which could also be brought under the tax net. The tax on unmanufactured forms is adjustable. And of course, there was a purpose for that. The purpose was that the unprocessed sector should get documented. So it is important now that maybe STPI and FBR can work together to see if this objective of keeping an adjustable tax so that the sector gets documented has delivered or not. We also note that SPDC's study on quantifying the potential tax base of cigarette industry provided a lot of evidence base for the arguments which we have presented today. We would like to propose that there's a very elaborate fiscal research and statistics cell at FBR, and we would really like that this study going forward should be updated regularly by FRS in FBR. Will help to update the estimates on both tax evasion as well as the avoidance side as well. We also note that there is a role for provinces as well, and provincial governments should also come forward to play their role when we talk about, and Vasif's presentation talked about illicit tobacco and informal trade of tobacco products as well. This is where provincial governments and border authorities should also come to the rescue. But beyond illicit tobacco as well, we note that there is a role of provincial excise departments as well when it comes to curbing illicit or illegal stocks of cigarettes. and probably provincial excise departments also need to be strengthened in that respect. There was a case which former Health Minister Zafar Mirza Saab had made for health tax levy, and the argument which was given after a while that federal government could not move ahead with this levy was because health is now a provincial subject. So here again is a role for provincial government. They should look into the potential of health tax levy for both raising the revenue, but also on the favorable impacts that it could have on the health side. Thirdly, the role of federal tax ombudsman. Last year, FTO had proposed to FBR to substantially raise FED, and of course, FBR had followed on those directions as well. We believe that there still is room, and in line with FTO's intent, one should move towards a uniform levy, and it should be 80% of the retail price. Uniform FED for all cigarette brands is proposed because it will simplify the current taxation regime. It could contribute to harmonizing the excise taxation across all tobacco products. In addition, we believe that going beyond the FTO orders, we should also incorporate an automatic inflation adjustment mechanism in each year's tax, so that if there is price increase, room for price increase due to inflation, that should also be catered for. And the tax revenue collection will also gain from the higher inflation if it is present in the system. On the track and trace system, I think we have received the advice very well from Abdul Wahid Okali Saab. We feel that there is now time that as the TTS implementation is being rolled out, there should be action research to support it, so that as we roll out TTS, regular evaluations and regular learning should become part of the system, and that learning will probably ease out the future phases of implementation. Currently, of course, one would like to see more data being shared on whether there was an increase in the number of cigarettes because of the tracking system. We do see the revenue growth, but then the revenue growth could also be due to the other two factors, which is that the cigarette prices were increased and there was a substantial increase in FED rate as well. So just isolating the impact of tracking system and then seeing what impact it has had is important, and one can do that. One can have a joint research with FBR going forward. On the 28th of December, Prime Minister had directed FBR to take further steps to curb the smuggling, tax evasion in overall tobacco sector, but particularly with respect to illegal transportation of tobacco as well. Under those directives, and to really implement those directives in the proper manner, I believe that WASF's recommendation around having a joint working group in which provincial governments and provincial excise is also present, I think that idea will go a long way to implement Prime Minister's directive of 28th December. I was happy to see when Mr. Okali suggested that there is room for greater people's engagement around TTS. There is room for advocacy and outreach. And I think this is where probably STPI, SPDC, and our partners and other local think tanks from the country should come together and support FBR in this objective. Thank you, Mahnur. It's back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waqar, for those recommendations and for rounding up the discussion as well. Mr. Khurram Hashmi was due to speak. However, he was facing some connectivity issues, so he wanted me to convey his regrets to all of you. With this, I'd like to bring this session to an end. I'd like to thank all panelists and attendees alike for taking out time for today's session. Until next time in this webinar series. Thank you. Dafis.
Thank you. Thank you.